Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Monday the 28th of April 2025. For the second consecutive year in a row, the Ministry of Defence has not published the equipment plan, which is an official document that sets out the department's spending plans on equipment procurement and support projects to keep the nation safe. The MOD attributes the lack of publication of the equipment plan to the ongoing strategic and financial reviews, claiming that a plan would not provide accurate reflection of the government's spending plans. And this comes in the context of the Prime Minister's recent announcement that defence spending will increase to 2.5% of GDP from April 2027, with an ambition for it to rise to 3% in the next Parliament. So both this committee, the Public Accounts Committee, and the Defence Committee considers the lack of publication of the equipment plan a huge impediment to our essential role in scrutinising defence spending and procurement, and therefore represents an unacceptable loss of transparency to Parliament and the nation. The PAC's last report on the equipment plan in 2024 identified significant changes in the MOD's management of its equipment budget, including a 16.9 billion deficit between forecast costs and available budgets, representing the largest deficit yet. So questions today will therefore be centred around examining the MOD's response to the committee's recommendation in this report on the 2023 equipment plan. We're also keen to learn what lessons the department has learnt from support of Ukraine, as well as the defence industrial strategy. And we'll also be examining our witnesses' plans to address the ongoing issue of recruitment and retention in the military, as well as concerns regarding the quality of accommodation for service personnel. We sincerely hope by the end of this hearing we'll have a clear plan from the MOD as to how our committee, and by extension Parliament, will be able to scrutinise these critical issues moving forward in the absence of an equipment plan. So to help us with all that today, we are very pleased to have a very senior team of witnesses in front of us. We have David Williams, who is the Permanent Secretary of the MOD. Welcome, David. You're a regular attender at this committee. Admiral Sir Tony Radkin, Chief of the Defence Staff. Very well, warm welcome, Admiral. May I preface this? How do you want to be addressed? Shall I call you CDS, Admiral? Admiral Radkin, how would you like to be addressed?
To be honest, Chair, whatever you want, but Admiral or CDS might be more appropriate.
Thank you very much indeed. Very helpful indeed. Maddie McTurnan is well known to us, and she's the Chief of Defence Nuclear. So your initials are, I suppose, CN.
Right, CDM.
CDM. I should get that right.
But Maddie is fine.
Very good. And finally, we're very pleased to welcome back to the committee Andy Stark, the Acting National Armaments Director, National Armaments Director Group, and CEO Defence Equipment and Support DENS at the MOD. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to our guest member for this session, Derek Twigg, on my right, who is a member of the Defence Select Committee. And we're also joined in the gallery by clerks from the Mid-Devon District Council. I think their names are David, Angie, Sarah and Laura. It's very good to see people coming from Devon coming up to see what we do here in Westminster. It's always regarded as a bit of a sort of mystery, so hopefully you'll be able to take it back and tell them in Devon what we do. So very nice to see you anyway. So without any further ado, I have two questions which I think you've been warned about at the top. I would like to ask, please, first of all, I think probably to you, CDS, and this is on the whole issue of you can't operate any military operation without appropriate personnel, recruitment and retention. In recent times, for every 100 soldiers that are recruited, 130 leave. That's clearly unacceptable. There's a range of reasons for that, but I would be very grateful if you would tell us what you intend to do to address that.
So thank you, and good afternoon to the whole committee. So it continues to be a problem. I think we should acknowledge that. So the armed forces are getting smaller each month to the tune of about 200 to 300. But that decrease is getting considerably less than it has been over the last couple of years. If you look at it through the lenses of the three services, the Navy has stabilised and is starting to get bigger now. The Air Force is reasonably stabilised, and the Army is still on a downwards trajectory. So for us, that's why I say it's still a problem, but it's easing, and the forecasting is that that will bottom out and we will start to rise across the whole of the armed forces in the next 2 to 3 years. The things that we're doing are, on the recruiting side, we have lots of people that want to join the nation's armed forces. And we have to get much better at converting those applications into recruits. And the numbers are really healthy. So it's in the order of 13 people applying for every place that we then turn into a serviceman or woman. But we are not as strong as we should be in terms of that conversion. We're better than we used to be. And we're doing a whole range of things in each service. But we've looked again at some of the barriers, not to reduce the quality or not to reduce in any way the competitiveness, but to allow more people to come forward. And some of that has been around the medical standards. And are we too rigorous on the medical standards that look at people as if everybody's going to serve for a full career of 22 years, when on average most people it's closer to 10 years? And therefore, can you look at someone's medical prognosis maybe 5 years at a time, and that gives them a route in, and you're less concerned about something that might materialise in 20 years' time? The government went through a whole series of medical standards and made about 100 variations last autumn. There's then also a recruitment and retention board, so that's being led by Minister for the Armed Forces and Minister for Veterans and People, to put all of us under pressure so that we are making all of these significant adjustments, but making lots of different adjustments to try to make it easier for people to be converted from their application into recruits. Then on the retention side, again, there's a whole host of initiatives, but some of this is addressing some of the fundamentals. You talked about accommodation, so can we improve accommodation? We might come back to that later. We're also the beneficiaries of substantial pay awards both last year and the year before, and that's working at both ends. So can it help to keep people in, but also can it attract more people to join us? So I don't know if you know, we used to have a system whereby you were on a sort of almost like a probationary wage for the first 6 months of your career until you started your second stage of training. We've now brought that forward so that everybody joins on their substantial salary that you get in that first rank. Now that's a huge increase, so that's closer to 25,000 rather than the previous probationary wage, which was £18,800. Now that's really significant because we had people that were wanting to join, and we risked that we were come and join the armed forces and we'll pay you less than the national minimum wage. So those are some of the things that are being corrected. And then I also think there's an onus on all of us to be as effective leaders as possible, so that these people that have joined, they join to serve their country, they join to have fantastic careers, they join to be developed during their time in service. How can we reinforce that that is what is happening, and that actually they made the right decision, and that there are reasons for them to stay in, and they're in an armed forces that continues to contribute to the safety of the nation in an extraordinary way, but they as individuals are treated as individuals, and they get the benefit of feeling that. And I think in the past we've had moments where we haven't treated, in a more demanding society, we haven't treated them as strongly as we should in terms of their individual requirements. And some of that is just being clearer about the stability of life for them and their families. Some of it is about the training that we offer them. Some of it is, right, this is what is happening in the armed forces, and these are some of the exciting initiatives and why you should stay in. But it's all of those things. It's getting better and it's forecast to continue to improve.
Really good to hear from you, Admiral, on that. We've got an awful lot to cover today. I would come back with supplementaries, but I can't. I'm now going to ask, I think this question on defence housing is applicable to you, Andy Start, because am I right in thinking under the new Quad arrangement, the National Armaments Director, of whom you are the interim at the moment, will take DIO into its orbit, so presumably you have taken it into your orbit. So is it right to ask you a question on defence housing?
Yes, it is, but I might refer to a friend on the grounds of having it for about 4 weeks. I'm still learning.
Okay. So the Defence Committee found that 2/3 of service family accommodation needed major work to meet modern standard, and families facing uncertain over allocation of accommodation. This committee has examined this for a long time, the poor standard of defence housing. You've just done the deal with Annington Homes. You've bought £6.1 billion worth of property. How are you going to remediate that property, and how long will the average serviceman take to see the benefits of that improvement?
Do you want to take it first, David, and I'll build on it?
Yes, certainly. So, Chair, as you say, the Annington deal that was concluded at the start of the year brings with it a range of opportunities, bringing back into public ownership some 36,000 service family houses alongside the stock that we already owned directly. That means that investment that we make in upgrading those houses becomes an investment in our own housing stock rather than in houses owned by our third party. It also unlocks the ability to think through on a sort of site-by-site basis whether actually it makes more sense to renovate, upgrade, or whether it makes more sense to knock down and rebuild housing. Two points, I think, for the committee just to register. So the government has announced a new housing charter. The ministers announced this, I think, on Friday the 18th, so just over a week ago, which sets out expectations, our ambition for minimum move-in standards, for a sort of digital front end, for service personnel and their families to register issues and complaints, making it easier to track upgrades to their property, as well as setting expectations around minimum standards, backed up with some initial investment for some quick wins to get after 1,000 or so properties that we, I think, are most in need of refurbishment. That's set alongside the announcement of a new defence housing review being led externally, which will really give us advice and options on how to capitalise on the freedoms and flexibilities we now have as part of that Annington deal. So a range of work in progress, which is going to see us improving the standard of service accommodation. It needs to be backed up by investment. We are putting investment in, but that will be a balanced investment decision for later of the year about how we sustain that over the decade ahead. I think there will be areas where we can see improvement in service accommodation pretty quickly, but it's an area where there has been underinvestment on a sustained basis for a number of years, and it will take a number of years to get all of the accommodation up to the standard that we would like.
Well, thank you. Sorry, yes, of course, Mr. Dodd.
Sorry, just a couple of adds that my colleagues in the DIO would like me to make. I think whilst there is clearly a job of work to be done here, and the DIO team are committed to doing it, they have made significant progress over the last 12 months, and the scale of complaints have reduced dramatically from around just over 4,000 to under 330. So those 330 complaints are not okay, and we need to get through that backlog. But the transformation in terms of the number of dissatisfied individuals and families is reducing significantly.
Thank you very much. I think we'll leave that there because we've got so much to cover. So I'm now going to go to my very able Deputy, Clive Betts, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. The last report indicated that there was a gap between spending commitments and the funding to meet those commitments of £16.9 billion. It's a pretty big gap. We've now got a commitment by the government to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. There's a concern, I'm sure, that that extra funding will simply be poured into that funding gap that previously existed, and the frontline services won't see any benefit from it. Do we have those concerns, or can you allay them?
Well, let me start, and the CDS may want to come in. So, look, I can allay them to an extent. The extent is that we are midway through the process of deciding how to invest that additional funding for defence in priorities to ensure that we are supporting the armed forces in the ask of them by the government, by the country. So we are in the final phases of the Strategic Defence Review, launched last July, which is essentially setting the policy and capability headmarks that we need as a country, as a department, as armed forces, to respond to the dangerous and uncertain world in which our armed forces personnel will be operating. So that sets, if you like, the parameters for the content of our future equipment programme. We have increased clarity on the level of funding for defence in this Parliament following the Prime Minister's announcement in the House at the end of February. And you should expect we are working through precisely what that means. And we are working in parallel on a refreshed defence industrial strategy and indeed a programme of defence reform. And the four of us here today are a visible sign of us getting on and implementing that defence reform programme, which will help us ensure that the money that we do get is spent more effectively in a way that not only secures better value for money for the taxpayer, but also ensures that our armed forces are getting the capabilities that they need to do the jobs that we ask of them. So my point about allaying your concerns is that, and this is why we have not published an equipment plan in the past past 12 months, is that we need to let that process run to its conclusion, set out then the investment choices that we are making, and absolutely be transparent as part of that. I imagine the committee will want to see or want to tell us how well those concerns are addressed or not. But whilst we are still just short of publishing the direction of travel for defence set out in the SDR, working through what the increased budget means and thinking about how we deliver that through our defence reform programme and our refreshed defence industrial strategy. I can't quite really today give you the detail, Chair, Deputy Chair, that you were hoping for. So
you're anxious to tell us, Permanent Secretary. Can you just tell us, will it be before the EU summit in the 19th of May or the NATO summit on the 24th, 25th of June?
Well, the government said that it will publish the SDR in the first half of the year, and we've been talking about spring, late spring, so we are not far off.
So it looks as though it will be before the EU summit on the 19th of May.
I wouldn't speculate on the precise level of dates between now and the summer break.
CDS.
Can I? Yes, just to build on David's points, the additional money, as well as being able to spend some of that money on new capabilities, almost the premise of your question of all it will do is to allow the current programme to be fulfilled. That if that's not an unfair interpretation, it risks skipping over how significant the existing programme is and how ambitious the current programme is, both from the previous government and this government. We're renewing the nuclear warhead. we're renewing our ballistic submarines. We are recapitalising the Army, and that's an enormous journey, over £40 billion. We've largely recapitalised the Air Force. We're about halfway through with the Navy. And then we're also looking to do AUKUS, both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, and we're investing for the long term in a 6th generation fighter. That's an extraordinary list of massive programmes and ambition that are part of the existing programme, as well as trying to embrace some of the areas where we need to strengthen where we're weak, but also take the opportunity of where there are some real advantages if we can invest in technology and new capabilities.
Admiral, that's all well and good. The problem was all those commitments that you just highlighted, there's 16.9 million deficit in actually funding them. So that's the concern. When we get the Strategic Defence Review, is it going to highlight what extra benefits the country is going to get specifically from the increased commitment to 2.5% of GDP?
Yes. So the Defence Review, I think we'll try to do what every Defence Review, which is to balance ambition and resource, but also chart a direction that we need to respond to the current geopolitical situation and to ensure that we have the armed forces that this nation needs, both in the here and now and for the future. I think in that way it's orthodox, and that's what we definitely anticipate that it will start to articulate.
Yeah, so that's a helpful answer, because I think it would be really useful to be able to see very easily in the Strategic Defence Review that the extra resources that are now being provided by the government have got a particular benefit that can be highlighted.
So, yes, you will see some of that, although it is a strategic defence review that will need to be translated into a set of specific investment decisions in individual capabilities and projects, and that will be work, I think, for later in the summer into the autumn. But what I would expect is that you will see confirmation of those areas of the current programme that remain really critical for us to take forward to support our armed forces in the way that CDS has described, as well as pointers for those areas of new capability, new technology that the reviewers believe we should prioritise, alongside, as the Chancellor made clear in her spring statement, the benefit that we will get not only in terms of defence capability for our armed forces, but about a contribution of the uplift in the defence budget to economic growth and prosperity in the country in terms of UK jobs and so on.
Just in terms of the saying that there's going to have to work through the strategic review into what it means for equipment. So effectively we're going to get an upgraded equipment plan, are we, in a few months after the strategic review?
So I think there will be a range of details for us to work through after the SDR is published.
That wasn't the clearest of answers, Secretary. Are we? You've just said you want me to answer. The Strategic Defence Review will not give us a clear indication of what the extra funding means for equipment. So you're going to be looking at that. When you've looked at it, are you going to produce a plan that we can all see?
Yes, there will be. I mean, as I said in a correspondence with the committee last month, the intention is to return to a drumbeat of providing greater insight and clarity about our future investment choices. We need to work through how far that mirrors what we've previously published, how far it reflects the new defence reform setup with four main areas of the department, and thinking about our budget in different ways. And we've previously said we're really quite interested to get feedback from the committee, having sat in a number of hearings on the equipment plan, and noting the Controller and Auditor General to my left. Your predecessor committees have shown more interest in the analysis that the Controller and Auditor General undertakes of our plans than in the plans that we publish ourselves. So there may be some of that analysis that we can incorporate in what we do.
Well,
so the precise form remains to be decided, but there is a ministerial commitment to share with this committee, with Parliament, more detail of our investment choices going forward.
well, can we just add on to that? And you just mentioned the important supply chains and the link to industry. So how is the spending review then eventually going to link into the industrial strategy? Because the Defence Secretary the other day made it very clear that he now wants to see more of the money spent on procuring from British companies and creating British jobs to grow the economy. So how are those going to be linked up?
So, I think let me talk slightly in the abstract and then see whether colleagues to the left may want to give you a specific example. Look, the Strategic Defence Review may say that it's a priority for us to invest more in a particular area of capability. One of the questions that we then need to work through is the extent to which thinking about sort of military capability requirements and timescales, that's something that we want to buy off the shelf. Is it a programme where we want to invest in developing new technology with UK design skills, UK manufacturing jobs? What are the options around partnership with international allies, European partners, with the US? So the means to deliver on that set of requirements, which themselves will need to be sort of articulated in more detail by the CDS and the new military strategic headquarters, is a sort of feature of that follow-on work. But as we then make our investment decisions, the criteria that the Defence Industrial Strategy will set out, and you refer to comments from the Defence Secretary. We published a sort of statement of intent around the Defence Industrial Strategy last autumn that sets out a number of areas that we want to prioritise. Prioritising British companies, UK-based jobs, but also thinking about partnership, about innovation, about the pace of delivery to the front line, and I think quite critically throwing from the Strategic Defence Review about the importance of our industrial base and our investment in that industrial base as part of the deterrent effect that we want to have on adversaries. Those are all criteria that get you from we need to invest in capability X to it's this programme rather than this programme. And that's the complexity behind our balanced investment decisions that we make on a routine basis.
Okay, I'll probably leave it there, except just to say, of course, Sheffield Forgemasters in my constituency, you're very much the owner of that facility, which is absolutely vital to our nuclear submarine programme. And that's something, it's that sort of investment, I think, is really important for us all to see. Local jobs, growth, and our strategic deterrent as well.
And Sheffield Forgemasters has an important part to play in supporting the nuclear programme, for which
I think we'll come on to those issues in future.
But we're also, but as an example, we are also looking at restarting artillery barrel production with Sheffield Forgemasters in the first instance to support our partners in Ukraine. Yeah. So that is thinking about how we can use our requirements and buying power to support the industrial base in a way that then gives us more resilience in our supply chain.
And I was at BAE Systems the other day, who were actually part of that programme also. Yeah. Okay.
So, if I may, very briefly, it is important to recognise that today the vast majority of the defence budget does get spent with British industry. Over 85% of it gets spent with British industry today. And whilst we do buy some capabilities in from partners and allies, we then export significantly larger amounts of money in export. The big opportunity is the fact that as the threat grows, and it is growing, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little later, the spending across NATO nations is increasing dramatically, and that's creating a very significant opportunity for growth in the defence sector, both in supporting the UK's needs as the UK's budget grows, but also in seizing those opportunities to help allies. So there's a very exciting opportunity for the defence industry going forward to generate greater jobs and employment across the country.
Thank you very much. Luke Charteris, please.
Thank you. Maddie McTurney, may I ask you around defence nuclear enterprise costs? And the last equipment plan reported the 10-year forecast costs to be £118 billion. We've seen that there's been further cost pressures. Would you first and foremost outline what the latest forecast is for D&E? Because, of course, this committee values transparency around what is a huge component of our military spending.
Yes, so it obviously is a very significant proportion of the MOD spend. I think the budget for the year just completed was 10.9 billion, which is about 18% of the total MOD budget. We are seeing upward pressure in the nuclear forecasts, and I think that's for a few reasons. You know, the last couple of years we've been really trying to drive forward the nuclear programme, and you might have seen that in some of the publications that we have put out, for example the command paper last year, of how we're really trying to recapitalise the nuclear programme. So driving that forward with the pace that it deserves has some impact on the forecasts. We've obviously got the impact of inflation that continues to flow through since the last equipment plan was done, and we have some new programmes. So you will have seen that last year we announced a new programme to re-establish the capability to produce nuclear reactor fuel for defence purposes. That's a new programme since the last equipment plan. And you know, there are others. Change scope for SSNA due to the AUKUS programme is another notable one. So there is upward pressure in those forecasts. Of course, there is, you know, an increase in funding, but the additional part where we've been, you know, very focused the last couple of years and will continue to be very focused on, I think, defence reform, the SDR and the industrial strategy will really help drive this, is really focusing on delivering those programmes effectively and efficiently. Really trying to drive to schedule, and there's a very strong correlation between driving schedule in a lot of these programmes and costs, because so many of the costs involved are workforce costs.
And are you able to give a figure today for your 10-year forecast for D&E?
If I compare the 10-year forecast that was in the equipment plan and base it on the same period, I would say that the forecast cost increase is in the order of about 10 billion.
So you're looking close to 130 billion. Okay, and it's just to get into that, is that based on a like-for-like programme scope, or does it include things like you just mentioned with regards to the, for example, the nuclear fuel
programmes as well,
okay.
But it's based on that same period.
Thank you. Can I just turn to the ring fence and how that's working? Of course, the government's rightly taking that role to uplift defence spending to 2.5%. We know how many billions annually this will deliver, but the MOD has had a history of tapping into conventional budgets to fund other projects such as nuclear. Could you confirm to Parliament today that not a single penny will now need to be diverted from conventional budgets to fulfil the needs and the funding needs of the defence nuclear enterprise?
Well, I think actually, if we sort of go back, it has actually been, you know, the nuclear budget that has, you know, at times in the past been reduced in order to fund other areas in the MOD, and I'm sure at different points in time you could say it has worked either way. So the way that the ring fence works is to ensure that we have all the programmes and costs that are absolutely core to delivering the deterrent in one place, and that is ring fenced in the sense that money cannot be taken out of that ring fence and put into the rest of the department. It is not actually ring fencing the rest of the department from nuclear, recognising the prioritisation of nuclear. So I think the ring fence itself is part of a broader set of flexibilities that we put in place with the Treasury to really, again, help drive delivery of these programmes. So you have the ring fence to protect the nuclear funding. We also have certain other features that I think were set out in the equipment plan that, for example, recognise that we've got these very, very large, very, very lengthy programmes. So trying to forecast exactly what your capital spend on these programmes is going to be year by year can be quite challenging in programmes of that magnitude. So we have the ability with Treasury consent to move money between years, which helps manage the budget effectively. A little bit the ability to move between programmes in order to support prioritisation. And these are just examples of measures that we are trying to use to ensure that effectiveness and efficiency in the way that we're managing the nuclear budget.
Just to put it very simply, do you think there's a risk that in future, elsewhere in the department, may have to be reduced to support and protect nuclear spending?
Well, as we sort of started, we haven't done the work, obviously, to work through the implications of all of the SDR and capability choices that will flow through that to set the future budgets. We will continue to manage between us in order that we can direct our resources to our ministers and government priorities at the time.
So it could be possible. Let me just ask around the sovereign industrial base. Are we using the record investment into DNE to bolster the British sovereign industrial base more broadly? And could you touch on, to Mr. Stark's point, what proportion of DNE spend is being spent on our sovereign capability? I think the figure Andy Stark gave was 85% of overall spending. And what's the comparable figure for nuclear spending, may I ask?
I can't give you the exact figure here and now, but the vast majority of spending for nuclear is in the UK. We do really prioritise this. I mean, some of the capability obviously has to be sovereign. So if you look at, Warhead, we have grown the number of employees at AWE by
so
about...
higher or lower than the 85%?
I'm going to, my instinct is that it would be slightly higher, but I would have to...
My thing would also be higher, but I happen to have the data for the other one. Maddie doesn't have the data for the other one just because we've not pulled it. So.
But, sorry.
I was just going to turn briefly to AUKUS, if I may, because it will see, and I've seen firsthand as members of the committee, the Astutes being built in Barrow, a fantastic site of engineering. Of course, there are dozens of nuclear attack submarines as part of the programme. Basic economics 101 would suggest that as you drive industrial scale, you would lower unit costs. Do you think AUKUS actually has a positive story in that it might drive efficiency across the DNE, and actually could it drive industrial productivity gains and drive down costs of some of the unit costs in the production of the Astutes, given that the size of the sector of nuclear powered attack subs is increasing?
Absolutely, we will be looking to drive, efficiencies wherever we can. I think there will be decisions around size of the class that we will produce in the UK and how we are going to contract for those. But absolutely, this should be a very, very significant benefit to the British industrial base as we are looking to deliver our own submarines, but also the creation of a trilateral supply base to support Australia as well. And thank you for taking the time to go up to Barrow and actually have a look, because I think we've got some really positive story there as we look at what we're doing at the BAE dockyard, the investment that we're putting in there, but also what we're doing more broadly for the town. Through the Barrow Transformation Fund, the government has committed £200 million over 10 years to help support the town as we look to attract more workers that will support the SSNA production over time. How do we actually support that town as we do that? And it sits alongside, the work that we've been doing across the UK on skills, again, to make sure that we are able to deliver effectively because we've got the right skills base in the country, but also it is creating, highly skilled, very attractive jobs actually across the UK.
And finally, if I may, Chair, in the nuclear supply chain, it's a huge opportunity for British defence SMEs, which will drive prosperity in Yorkshire, in my region, and the rest of the country. So how are you, what targets perhaps might you have to ensure that the nuclear supply chain is open to British defence SMEs?
So one of the things that we will be doing later this year is a supply chain conference in order that we can be talking to those SMEs and talking, obviously we talk a lot to the primes, but there are over 3,000 companies, I think, involved in the nuclear supply chain in the UK. So making sure that we can highlight those opportunities and ensure that people see the attractiveness. I think with the government's very firm commitment through the triple lock to nuclear and that messaging, it really helps give that positive message and stability to industry as they think about how they can invest and how they can support being part of the nuclear sector.
So you'd like to see more British SMEs supplying the nuclear supply chain? Thank you.
I think I'm going to, we've got to speed this whole thing up, otherwise we're going to be here for a very long time. But I think the really important bit of Mr. Charteris' question, Permanent Secretary, that he got to was that if you take the figure in paragraph 2.17 of being a reliable figure of 117.8 billion for the nuclear D&E budget, and if you take the latest figure of the total budget figure of 305 billion, that's getting towards 40% of the entire budget is going on nuclear. This is surely sucking money out, and it's the percentage is increasing all the time. It's not as if it's the report makes it clear that the nuclear part of the budget is rising as a percentage all the time. This is surely sucking money out of the rest of the budget. It means that will have to be cuts elsewhere in the budget, doesn't it? The equipment budget.
Well, it doesn't mean that there have to be cuts elsewhere in the equipment budget because, as the Prime Minister announced at the end of February, the defence budget is also rising, and one of those big capability questions that we need to answer through the SDR and the follow-on work is the balance of investment in nuclear and conventional capabilities. So the equipment programme is about half of our spend. So if you factor that in, yes, we have the costs of crewing the submarines, but the sort of 20% figure for the defence nuclear enterprise on an annual basis is on the whole where I think we are. So it may increase on a small sort of set of percentages here or there. But I think it's not at the 40% level in my mind.
Okay, thank you very much. Sarah Hall, please.
Thank you, Chair. The NAA's report on the 2023-2033 equipment plan highlighted supply chain issues that constrain delivery, particularly facing supply chain risks, industry capacity constraints due to skills gaps, shortages of key components, and an increase in demand for defence equipment in other countries. The integrated procurement model was announced in Parliament in February of last year, and the new model was designed to drive increased pace in delivery of military capability to UK forces on that front line. My question is, did you begin, and this is to Mr. Williams, did you begin implementing your new integrated procurement model from April 2024 as planned?
Yes, we do, but I might ask Mr. Stark to update you. But before he does, but this is in the context of this government has a baseline position of quite far-reaching reform of the department. So under our new setup, Ms McTurnan is responsible for the Defence Nuclear Enterprise. I run the new Department of State. The CDS heads up a new military strategic headquarters, and Mr. Start is heading up the National Armaments Director group. We need a slightly snappier description. But in part, this is about setting clearer sets of accountabilities, clearer responsibilities for different bits of the department, with a particular focus, I'll bring it back to the integrated procurement model, on how we specify the requirements, which is a responsibility for the MSHQ, that our frontline forces will need, how we then engage industry, both strategically and on a programme-by-programme basis, to best work out how to meet those requirements, which will be a responsibility for the National Armaments Director, and then for us to agree a set of proposals that we will then take forward and enact, each being clear about our role in that. So there are a number of the features of the integrated procurement model that we will want to port into our future ways of operating, but the step-back defence reform programme that we are now implementing has a broader set of ambitions, I think, for how we improve acquisition, not least getting after recommendations of previous versions of this committee and your sister sort of Defence Select Committee. But Mr. Stark, I don't really want to come back on the specifics.
Please do. I can come back on supply chain and supply chain resilience if you wish, but to answer your question around is it getting at accelerating pace, answer yes. Under the previous government, we developed the integrated procurement model to recognise that the threat to the nation had changed, and that means the pace with which we were going about acquisition was no longer relevant to an environment in which our adversaries are developing new capabilities on the battlefield every day. So as part of that, the integrated procurement model had a number of features, one of which was to develop different commercial pathways, of which the focus was on spiral development by default. That is getting to a minimum viable capability and then improving it over time, and that allows you to get capabilities into the hands of the warfighter much earlier. It also focused on making sure that we took the views of industry in from the get-go. So instead of Tony giving the National Armaments Director a very firm requirement, which he then went to industry, now the CDS goes to the NAD with a warfighting concept and a problem statement, and the NAD goes to industry to say what is the best way we can tackle that. That drives much better value because it allows you to get the 80-20 out of the acquisition, but it also allows us to look at exports with industry from the get-go and make sure that we design products that can work not only for the UK market but also for our allies and for third parties. All of that's allowing us to go after speed. We rolled out the first new commercial pathway, which is the Spiral Development Handbook and Procedures, to the Commercial Department last year. Feedback's been excellent. It's flowed into a number of early stage projects, and examples of that, things like the mine hunting capability, where we've got an initial capability out in the Gulf working today with autonomous drones working really effectively. And we'll spiral up from there. The same is going on in the drone space with a program called Tequila and in the land mobility program. So integrated procurement model is in place and is working and is accelerating the pace. We're learning a lot from Ukraine, and I can unpack that a little bit more later on in terms of additional things we're doing over the top. And we're taking those extra lessons into the way in which we'll modify the integrated procurement model further under the Strategic Defence Review and Defence Industrial Strategy. One of those elements is the Chancellor has already announced, which is breaking the budgets into 3 segments. The top segment being the long-term strategic, the long-term big strategic programs we have with platform providers, submarines, ships, aeroplanes, where the goal is to transform the time to market from 6 years to 2. That's challenging, but actually we think doable, and will actually really benefit industry and inward investment. To second tranche will be spiral development, which is adding the solutions and systems on top of that, where we're looking to reduce the time to market from 3 years to 1. And then on top of that, particularly learning from the real successes we've had in Ukraine, is to do a lot more rapid commercial exploitation. We have a process that's been working phenomenally well with what we've been doing for our Ukrainian colleagues, and that's bringing capability that they're getting into the battlefield in weeks, not months. We call it a 3-2-1 process, which is where we identify how much we're prepared to spend and roughly what the problem statement is. We go out to market and make sure we get at least 3 bids, but often we get 30 or 40, often from SMEs. We will down select to 2 that look like they're really exciting possibilities, and we'll try those products out. In the case of Ukraine, we take them to theatre and we actually check how well they work. On the basis of which one works best, we then select that one and scale it. That's really, really powerful in terms of the effect that it's having on the battlefield, but it's also transforming the relationship we've got with SMEs and with private equity and venture capitalists that support them. Because if you can get the procurement timescales down to 3 months, suddenly you're now in the timescales that are attractive to that VC and PE community. So that's really exciting, and you'll see a lot more of that to come.
Okay. That's probably sounds about the question. That's fine. Yeah.
Right, we now go on to Rachel Gilmore, please.
So I'd like to ask CDS. I wonder whether your understanding of the support provided by NATO allies has been affected by recent geopolitical developments.
If I look at the NATO story as a whole, actually NATO's getting stronger. So 30 countries have now become 32 with the addition of Finland and Sweden. The other piece, which is pretty much common across all NATO countries, is the increase in their defence budgets. The other element, which I think has been a strength of the NATO direction over the last few years, and I pay tribute to SACEUR General Cavoli, is the clarity of refreshing our operational plans so that those are in a much better state, so that the member nations know how they best fit in, but also what capabilities are required. So in that sense, NATO feels to me much more significant than it has done in the last few years, much more significant than it did in the previous 5 years. So it's in a strong position and strengthening.
Okay, so you mean it's becoming more strategic and more like a jigsaw puzzle that actually works together with an impact that flows from it?
Yes, I think it's always been strong, but I think it's even stronger now. It's stronger because it's got more nations. It's stronger because the enormous increases in defence spending, and we're talking hundreds of billions. I think it's about 600 billion just from European countries since 2014. And then if you look at the projections over the next 10 years, it's at least that again. So those are enormous increases in NATO spending, and it's predominantly through European countries. And then there's the operational acuity of a war in Europe and the need to refresh plans and the need to look at what capabilities we require, and the added sharpness that that's giving to all of the countries and to all of the militaries.
Okay. So this is a question for David Williams. I wonder whether you've undertaken the planned force testing of this support in the last year as part of your capability planning processes.
Yes, actually, so this actually is a process that in future will be run through the MSHQ with close engagement with the National Arms Director, but we do a force testing process on an annual basis. And actually, most recently, that has been an exercise that has included close allies and partners as well, in the same way as we take part in their equivalent exercises.
Yeah, I would have hoped that was the case. Thank you.
Okay, Ryan, please.
Thank you. Just following on from that, I suppose it's to David. Have you done an assessment of the extent to which our kind of allies' capability or our capability is reliant on cooperation with allies, and in an uncertain world, how exposed we might be to changes in political will or that support being curtailed or withdrawn at a later date for various operations like Ukraine, or even just some of the tech or development programs that we're involved in. Have we done an assessment of that, and are we honest with ourselves about the extent of those risks?
So I think my answer to this is on a sort of couple of levels, and colleagues to my left in particular may want to supplement briefly. So look, firstly, I think with that sort of renewed emphasis on planning from NATO, I mean, that is all about ensuring that now the 32 nations are able to operate collectively, with each of us knowing our place in those NATO war plans. And I think as a theme from the Strategic Defence Review, I don't think I'm giving away many secrets here because it's in the terms of reference from the review as an articulated policy of the government about us thinking NATO first in the way in which we think about our policy framework, our capability requirements, and indeed then into our procurement and acquisition. That kind of join-up assessment of where are we providing support to our allies, where are we dependent on our allies, is very much at the heart of our capability planning and thinking. It comes to me, I think, in part from some of our lessons from Ukraine about a renewed emphasis on the importance of standardisation, of interoperability, and this is a theme that Mr. Stark has been pursuing with NATO national armaments directors. And of course, as we think about both war planning, or indeed as we think about engagement on operations, then through the military lens, what each partner will bring to the table, how we ensure interoperability, where those links are, is sort of central to the sort of force estimating process that the CDS runs.
So to build on a little bit, so we have there are two really important groups to be aware of that we don't talk about very often. One is the Conference of National Armaments Directors, which is my peers across the NATO nations who work together to make sure that we are able to support NATO's plans and sustain them through the fight. And the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, which is about 40 nations that are working together with significant overlap with the CNAD team, that are working together to support the Ukrainian group. And out of both of those communities, we're learning a lot about what it takes to be able to fight today and to be able to sustain that fight through the fight. And some of the key lessons that you might wish to draw. The first is that in a fight, you need your allies, and that's incredibly important. It's absolutely a lesson learned from Ukraine. Secondly, that you want to reduce the number of different systems that you've got, because the more different systems you have, the more complicated it is to manage the logistics, and the more difficult you make the fight, and the less deterrent effect you provide to your nation, so you reduce the value for money that you're getting for the money that you're spending. So as far as possible, you want to work together with as many allies as possible to co-design, co-develop, co-produce, co-support equipment, as we do for things like the Boxer, where we design it together, we build it together, and we upgrade it together. That's a much more cost-effective way of operating than when we all have different systems. So we need to collaborate to do that as far as possible. And then finally, to make sure that you have sufficient ability to sustain the product in the fight if your supply lines are disrupted. So that's about making sure you know enough in your country to be able to continue to operate the piece of equipment, even if your ally, for either political reasons or for technical reasons, is disrupted. So we're learning those lessons. And I would like to take the opportunity to say thank you to the NATO Industrial Advisory Group, which is the team of industry working with us. Because another lesson we've absolutely learned from Ukraine is that industry is as fundamental a part of our ability to warfight and sustain as our armed forces are.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Oliver Ryan. We're very pleased to have Derek Twigg from the Defence Committee here with us. Derek.
Mr Williams, could you set out for the committee how your reform programme is going to deliver more equipment projects on time and to cost?
So look, at the heart of the reform programme, as I sort of touched on already, is being really clear about specific responsibilities and accountabilities within the four main areas of nuclear, Department of State, military strategic headquarters, and the National Armaments Director. In the capability space, and CDS and the NAD will just want to amplify this, it's a clearer set of accountabilities around setting the military capability problem statement in the MSHQ. What are the problems that we need to solve as part of our war planning activity, and then a richer engagement with industry about how you solve the problem set, rather than here are 1,100 specific requirements that we would like you to meet, though the chances are we will change our mind on half of them while we are midway through the procurement. That's coupled with a sort of streamlining and simplification of process, including making sure that our approvals process strikes a better balance between assurance and pace. And it's as much, though, about mindset, about culture, about ways of working, led from the top by defence ministers, by the four of us as the leaders of our individual areas, about the importance of pace, about the importance of thinking about the defence enterprise not just within the boundary of the department, but out into industry. So there's lots there.
I think we get the structure because we've read our briefs and we understand that. I think what I'm trying to find is actually on the ground, how is it going to make a difference to delivery? I mean, you mentioned culture, for instance, and maybe you could give us a few examples of how you're changing culture.
Yeah, well, can I look to my left and see if you want to give some examples? If not, I will carry on.
Really content to do so. So look, firstly, firstly, it's worth saying that we have been improving programme performance across the range of defence over the last few years, and you've seen the fact that at any one time, my DNS team, if I just speak to that for a minute, has around 2,500 contracts at any one time, about 600 programmes. The vast majority of those programmes deliver on or ahead of cost and on time. So we do have problems with the bigger, larger programmes, and I'm happy to speak to that in a bit more detail in a minute. But the general performance is much better than people perceive, but we'd still like it to be better. The NAD structure, the change of the defence reform, gives the National Armaments Director significantly more control over the end-to-end acquisition process than historically the old structure used to have. So under the old structure, I, within DNS, for example, would receive a very, very detailed requirement from my military colleagues that were normally specified, because of the incentives, were normally specified right at the realms, the top ends of physics. They really wanted to, they tick the natural inclination of a military officer, because they want to protect the people around them, is to tick everything on the option box. Under the new model, the CDS articulates to the NAD how they want to warfight, their fiscal prioritisations, and the military problems they're trying to solve. And the NAD has the opportunity to go back and offer the most appropriate way of meeting that need, having worked with industry. That stops an inclination towards over-specification, and it stops an inclination towards entryism.
So how much over-specification do you think is still in the system?
How much?
Over-specification is still in the system.
I think there are, if you look at programmes like Ajax, which we're working through, I would say Ajax was tremendously over-specified. I would say recognising the new structures only start on the 1st of April. I would say there's still quite a lot of over-specification in the specification. It's been in the system. It's been getting better because of a thing called JROC, which Tony and the Vice Chief influence to try to force that down. But there is more work to be done.
So how would you then stop the over-specification? What is the trigger that appears somewhere in your new quad organisation?
Yes,
says, hang on a minute, someone's over-specifying here. What is that?
The trigger is to have a completely different system. So if you're asking what will be different, I say what is different is the drive.
This is the question. What is different?
Yeah. So what is different? The drive and clarity from the Secretary of State that we are going to reform the whole of defence. So I was a reformer for the Navy. That's a small part of defence. Andy was a reformer for DNS.
So sorry to interrupt, Mr. CDS. So you're saying there was no clarity from the Secretary of State of Defence before?
I don't, for the reform programmes, there was not the same clarity, the same energy, the same commitment that the whole of defence is going to have a full reform programme. That is very, very different to the way that we've had some recent reform programmes. Defence design, head office review, they have not led to substantial changes. This is different in its culture and tone. It's been led from the top. It is top-down driven in a much stronger way than some of those previous reform programmes. And then some examples. When Andy talks about those major contracts are now going to have to be commissioned, instead of being 6 years, 2 years, what that means is that all of our processes and the way that we do business has to be resculptured in order to fit into 2 years. So the tendency for duplication, the tendency for not being clear enough as to who is in charge and who is accountable for which part of the business in defence, the tendency to overly process, the tendency to have an extraordinary number of requirements when we're trying to buy a piece of kit, that all of that is going to have to change.
Thank you, that's useful. I'm just trying to get to the process. So what is the trigger then that hits you, the quad, that you find within the system there's over-specification, or people are still changing a project well down the line of its development?
So the inception...
Where do you get,
so
the trigger for you?
So the inception will be different. The inception for a new capability will come from the Chiefs Committee. So it still involves all the chiefs. So you've got your expertise, Army, Navy and Air Force, and from Strategic Command. But the Chiefs Committee, chaired by me, will give the problem statement to the NAD as to what is it that we require in the future for a new capability.
Yep.
But that will be much more of a problem statement rather than these are the 1,000 things that need to be achieved for our next armoured fighting vehicle. It will be, we much broader. One of the examples is we need more lethality in terms of our long-range weaponry, rather than giving a whole series of specifics. It will be a much more general problem statement. That then gives the NAD the opportunity to go out to industry to see what's out there, to go out to the innovators, and then to explore in a much more open way, and then come back with solutions. And then the other piece that is different is we then take it as a Chiefs Committee. So if we want to have an integrated force that combines maritime, air, land, space and cyber, can you take that new capability in the round, looking at it across all 5 domains? Can you also be much more grown up about the infrastructure element that has to go with that, and the choices? So if the NAD is offering something that is off the shelf and you can get it quickly, that might only meet 80% of the problem statement, rather than being constrained to meet something that actually was 120% of something that might be out there if it gets invented in the next few years. It's very, very different.
I'm still not sure about the trigger, but can you just, maybe you, Mr. Williams, could you tell us currently, in terms of driving through the reform, do you have the right calibre and skill set within the MOD, or do you have shortages in that area to drive this reform through? In other words, is there a risk still of having the people in place to drive reform acquisition through?
So,
I mean, I don't want to, if you don't mind, because time is tight, is it a yes or no answer you've got?
So yes, I think we do in the sort of central team, but as we come to roll the full impact of the reform programme across the department, and indeed as we deliver in parallel the recommendations from the Strategic Defence Review and embody the Defence Industrial Strategy, it needs that sort of reforming transformation mindset and skill set across the department, not just in head office.
Right, my final point is that the Procurement Minister at the Business Committee in March said the target is to reduce the average time to contract at the top layer from 6 years to 2 years, the middle layer from 3 years to 1 year, and at the bottom layer we want to be able to get the contract in 3 months. When will that target be reached?
So it'll take us time.
You don't have a timescale then?
We'll drive it through. It'll take us a number of years to get the averages down because we've got a lot of legacy programs that are in. But it's absolutely directionally correct and it's the right thing to do. We'll change the processes this year, so you've then got to see that flush through. So you'll start to see the first of those programs under the new model this year.
But it's a target. It's a target without a timescale then.
Sorry?
It's a target without a timescale.
It is,
Okay,
but it's also it's happening now. So that model is alive and well and being experienced in the way that we're supporting Ukraine. And I think that the comfort for the committee is that isn't one or two capabilities where we've been able to go super fast. That is a whole swathe in billions and in a massive range of capabilities where we have demonstrated that this is definitely possible.
Yeah, I don't think I agree with your narrative of it's a target without a timescale. We will have rolled out a new set of processes that mean that new programs follow those timeframes by the end of this calendar year. I hope faster. As CDS has just said, we've delivered well over 1,000 programs to Ukraine using an accelerated model. So we know we can go incredibly quickly when we have the right things in place. And what we're doing is taking that learning and applying it back into the acquisition of the equivalent programs within the UK model.
And that particular metric will be part of a refreshed dashboard that is being reviewed by us as a senior leadership team, with ministers, by the Defence Board. I think we will be in a better position to send an expectation of predominantly meeting that target once we're through the other side of the SCR, the Defence Industrial Strategy. We've made a bunch of changes as part of defence reform from the 1st of April, but 25-26 I would describe as a sort of transitional year as we bed in those changes. So I think we will get to the point where there is a timescale for that target later in the year.
So, CDS, can I test out with a practical example the answers you've been given to Mr. Twigg? You said earlier on there's going to be a complete overhaul of the army. You've also said just now that you need to increase the lethality of the army. Your number 2, CGS, said you need to double the lethality of the army by 2027. That's 2 years' time. I'm just wondering how practical, and you've also said, both you and Mr. Stark, you send down a specification, he goes out and procures. Now, to do that, you're going to need a lot of kit to be procured in a short space of time. For example, you're going to need to upgrade 140 Challenger tanks from 2 to 3. You're going to need to introduce a new artillery system. You're going to introduce a new deep strike missile. You're going to introduce an entirely new battlefield digital communications system. Is this timetable really practical?
Yes. So, and General Rowley Walker talks about doubling the lethality in terms of 2027 and tripling it by 2030. Now, one level, I'll be super honest with the committee, that's a reflection of how low the lethality is at the moment. So we've got to be honest. But it's also a reflection of the opportunities that are out there and what we've learned from Ukraine. And that's, whether that's, and some of them we have done already. So the Archer artillery system that we procured much more quickly than we would have done ordinarily. But it's also the benefits, especially in the land domain, of what is available in terms of some of the drone technology, whether that's in ISR terms or also in lethality terms, and how you blend that with some of your more traditional programs. And that's where you then get that uplift in lethality, and then there's an ability to then carry that on. And that's what Rowley Walker is demanding of the Army. That is absolutely in tune with where we think the Defence Review will come out. And it's also in tune with two elements of both technology and industry responding and offering these opportunities. We're seeing it in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, if I could build on it. You listed the historic programmes. What we're going to see is a mixture of of crewed capabilities, the things that we would historically recognise, and we have an ongoing modernisation programme of that is delivering. We've delivered all the Apaches. The boxers are rolling off the production lines. Ajax is up to 100 odd vehicles now, I think, from memory, and we've got the first of the Challenger 3s rolling out. But the real lethality shift comes from when you have attritable and disposable capability. And what do I mean by that? It's when you take programs like Tequila that's adding drone capability on top of those, so we can see farther and further and be more effective and hit more. We're adding one-way effectors, which are low-cost cruise missiles for in layperson's terms, that we've done very effectively for Ukraine, that we're rolling those out into the UK Army. So the combination of that traditional crewed equipment with that autonomous capability laid over the top transforms the lethality of our military.
Well, thank you both very much for those really interesting answers. We are now going to take a short break, and I do want to please committee members and witnesses to stick to this. The clock is 16:46. If we could be back here by 5 o'clock, 1700 sharp, we can then get going on the next bit. And certainly in the next bit, we will want to be examining the lessons that you've learnt from Ukraine. So thank you so far for what you've said, really helpful. Thank you to the committee. Order. Order. And when she's caught her breath, the first questioner is Sarah Olney, please.
Excellent. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Williams, we've obviously covered it quite a bit before the break, but I just wondered if you could be more specific in some of the lessons you think you've learned from procuring equipment for Ukraine.
In the interest of speed, if it's all right, I wonder whether I might hand over to Mr. Stark and then to CDS.
Mr. Stark.
So I think to slightly reprise the earlier conversation, I think the first thing is that allies really matter.
Yeah.
One of the great pleasures of this job was seeing some of my staff being awarded a medal by President Zelensky for the unstinting support that my team have been able to give them in Ukraine. He was very clear in that conversation that his country would not exist if allies had not stepped up to the plate to support him and his nation. So allies really matter is the first lesson. The second is that you need a mixture of high-end capabilities, those exquisite crude capabilities that have been so essential to part of the fight, as well as affordable mass. And it's a mixture of the two that you have to be a capable military. So the high-end stuff are things like the Storm Shadow capabilities that have been absolutely fundamental in the war, but are expensive long-term developments that you have to have and are right on the edge of technology. But at the other end, the transformation that has happened as a consequence of first-person drones and the fact that as a consequence of that, it is almost impossible to operate within 15 kilometres of the front line anymore in any degree of safety. The combination of those two capabilities is what really matters, and that's driving some of our thinking going forward. We need both high-end and affordable mass. The third thing is about recognising there is a fantastic opportunity to innovate in parts of the market, and that's why we're going forward with this proposal to segment our market. At the top of the market, big, long-term, exquisite but necessary capabilities, submarine ships, 6th-gen aeroplanes, but also capabilities where we go to market with a problem and we see a fantastic array of British and Ukrainian SMEs working together to develop unbelievable innovation. And it's been absolutely joyful to see, and we're taking that through into our new model. Fourth lesson, a mix of crewed and uncrewed. Autonomy is starting to really, really matter. So augmenting your helicopters with autonomous collaborative platforms, making sure that you've got AI that is able to help for parts of the battlefield when there's a very high levels of electronic warfare. Those kind of innovations are really important. And then the final thing, as I mentioned earlier on, it's about designing together, it's about building together, and it's about supporting together. It's a team game. If you don't work together with your allies and integrate your design and support capabilities, you cannot be robust and resilient. One of the things I'm really excited and proud about is the way in which our industry has embraced Ukrainians' industry through a thing called Task Force Hearst, and we're working together, and we're both benefiting. Ukraine will have, by the time the conflict hopefully finishes, Ukraine will have one of the biggest defence industries in the world, and it will be one of the most innovative and adaptable industries in the world, and it will be one that is closely plugged in with ours and will be benefiting from each other.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stark. I found that really inspiring. Thank you. I just wonder if you could elaborate slightly on the different aspects that you mentioned there. In terms of the ability to procure at pace and to really increase or speed up the timescales, that's the part of the procurement process that the report really highlights, that the Ukraine conflict and the need to keep Ukraine provided with weaponry, that's the bit you've really had to change in terms of normal procurement procedures. What's enabled you to increase the speed at which you procure?
So in that segment, I'm going to call it the bottom segment, but in the segment where we're really driving commercial innovation, What's made it really effective is firstly deciding how much, Ukraine being really clear about how much it was going to spend, or the UK being really clear about how it's going to spend through our task forces. The military users being clear about the problem they were trying to solve rather than the detailed specification. And then engaging with industry at pace, saying, I've got this much money, I've got this problem, what solution have you got? We've then been taking those problem statements early with industry at high levels of classification. So we've been sharing some secret data with trusted industry partners to work with us to solve the problem. And as a consequence of that, they've come back with some incredible innovation at real speed. We've had some cases where we've been able to get a solution within 48 hours. But more generally, we've been following what's called the 3-2-1 process, which is where we've rapidly gone out with a problem statement. Within a month, got a proposal back from quite a lot of industry players. We've then used experts to down select that to 2 players, and we've taken those 2 players into theatre and tested the kit. That's allowed us to then choose and scale up the one that's really most effective. And we'll do it again 3 months later, and again 3 months after that, because the adversary is innovating at such a pace that if we don't keep doing it, our equipment becomes out of date.
Excellent, thank you. Admiral Radican, I just wonder if there's anything you want to add in terms of what's been proved successful in kind of speeding up the timelines. Has that got wider application across the MOD?
So thank you. It definitely has. So on what Andy's explaining, so it's this clarity of you need something for a particular problem, and can you go out and see what's out there, and can people innovate? But the other facet that goes with it, which I think is very different to a peacetime mentality, and it's one that we need to embrace in a much stronger way, is that in effect your factory is part of your weapon system. So the ability of that factory to deliver what you need, the ability of that to even when the demand is lowered, that you know that you can call off on that factory for 10,000 drones a month, and it exists, and you've got that capability. That's some of the more substantial reorganisation of UK defence industry that I think that we will have to demand. So some of this is quite fundamental. The only caution I would have is that there's lots with Ukraine though that is affirmatory of what our security construct is. So when you go up higher, we keep our nation safe by the fact that we are a nuclear nation. We've got collective security through NATO. So if you're going to be in a gun club, it's quite handy to be in the most powerful ever military gun club. And then it's also really useful to have America as the strongest military nation on the planet as one of your your closest ally. So that construct has been affirmed. And then there are things that we're learning from Ukraine and which we need to adopt. And then there are things where we need to also say, we will not fight like that. So when you step back and you look at some of the tactical fights in Ukraine, which for large parts has been a sort of artillery and deeply tactical land battle with Russia putting forward enormous sums of people into harm's way and just grinding through, the absence of air power, the absence of more modern techniques, the absence of manoeuvre, the absence of what we would call an all-arms battle, the absence of it being even joint and linked with your Air Force and your Navy. There are lots of things about Ukraine which we should be really clear. That is not how we would fight, and that is not part of the Western model. And the way that Russia is fighting and struggling, again, is affirmation of our way of fighting and that we would be successful.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Sarah Green, the other Sarah.
Just to follow up on what my colleague has just asked, I'm interested in the change processes that you've just been describing to us, because earlier, Mr. Street, you mentioned 1,000 programmes delivered at accelerated pace, and you've referred to the 3-2-1 process. I'm not sure if my question is for Mr. Williams or for Mr. Street, so I'll allow you to decide between you. But which of your changed processes has made the biggest difference in reducing those procurement timescales?
So, the speed with which we're operating in Ukraine comes from having very clear military demand signal, giving problem statements rather than requirements, and then the authorities for my team to execute. So the delegations of authority without lots and lots of separate people checking. In the historic UK model, which was designed for the post-Cold War peace dividend, when the threat was very low, the example that I sometimes give is on one of our programmes, there was for every one person doing the work, there were 11 people in government checking that person who'd done the work hadn't made a mistake. In the Ukraine model, we have people sitting side by side who check, which is what's called the first line of defence. We have a second team who review and audit it quickly, which is the second line of defence, and then we go ahead with the decision. And we have a third team that audits it afterwards, but doesn't slow down the process. So in the Ukraine model, the number of checkers who actually are slowing the process down is effectively 1, and I think that's prudent. And then we're checking after the case to see if there's any lessons we should learn. So that 11 reduces to 1. That makes a phenomenal difference to the speed with which you can operate. And we are therefore trying to design our new processes for the UK model to be more like that, and we're going through that process at the moment.
If I may, just from the sort of accounting officer perspective, building on Mr. Stark's comments, what we have done here is agree with ministers, with CDS and I, the overall effect that we're trying to deliver. So sort of operating, if you like, at a portfolio level, not at individual purchases. Agreeing a set of key parameters around what we want it in theatre on, these kind of timelines, and specifically from an accounting officer's perspective, being really clear about where my risk appetite sits. And if it's within that risk appetite, I don't really want people to come back to me very much. If it's outside that risk appetite, it doesn't mean we won't do it, but I then need to be engaged in the conversation. So it's about streamlining the process and pushing as much of the decision making down the hierarchy as we can.
So I have a follow-up question, which is for the CDS, which links to that, which is around the risks involved in those changes. And you've said you're hoping to move towards 1 rather than 11, but that's not necessarily where you'll land. So I'm curious to know what the risks are attached with having fewer eyes checking things.
So I was going to add to the other piece on terms of the if David is more comfortable with this is the financial risk that he's willing to tolerate. The other facet is the operational risk that we're willing to tolerate in order to field something, because Ukraine needs it desperately in order to allow them to continue to defend their country. And what I think it's proven is that if your financial risk is a bit higher and your operational risk is a bit higher, the ability, in everything that Andy has explained, the ability to then provide kit very quickly exists. I think you then have to, if you're in the middle of a war, then your risk is going to be extraordinarily high. So some of the regulations and the procedures that we have, much which may be sensible, but some which may also risk being arcane in terms of test and evaluation, and do you need one person to be checking or do you need 11, then that's the bit that where we've got to gauge about what is sensible. And even on that, that initial conversation where we go out to people and say, this is the problem, we're looking for something to match this problem. There are parts of the UK defence industry that cannot operate in a 4 or 8 week cycle, and they struggle to even provide a concept, never mind the idea that this will lead to a prototype and be tested very quickly afterwards, but then they have to change. But it's how much of that can we adopt and what is right. It will not be right for nuclear submarines, but it can be right for lots of our other equipment, and it absolutely is necessary because the pace of technology and the opportunity that is out there is running so quickly that if we stick to the old model, then actually we get kit that is out of date by the time that we can field it. So it's fundamental.
I wouldn't want to leave you with the impression that we haven't been tackling this. So after we've been transforming my DNS organisation dramatically over the last 2.5 years. We've completely restructured it. It's 10% now running 10% cheaper. It's already 8% more efficient in terms of delivering 8% more output at the same time. Dodgy maths, but that's roughly 18% more efficient, which is pretty good going. And we'll get more out of that as we introduce these new processes and techniques over the top. So I don't want to give you the impression we've not been getting at this, but that kind of issue of too many people checking and not doing so in an organised way, we have been getting after already. Our opportunity in defence reform is now to completely change the processes to really prioritise speed as part of it. And as Tony just said, that has become absolutely imperative, because if you take too long, you guarantee what you're providing isn't value for money because it's out of date.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Lloyd Hatton, please.
Thank you, Chair. And to build really upon on the previous two contributions, I suppose one thing that was clear in the NAO report, and which has been demonstrated again today, is that the conflict in Ukraine has meant that the department has had to look at much more innovative ways at sourcing military equipment. It broadly seemed to be a success story in the way that that's been done. So I think what would be really helpful for this committee is if you could explain in a bit more detail how you change those processes and what have been the real successes, and also if there have been any pitfalls as well, what those have been and where we're learning from them.
So in terms of the backward look, so what did we do for Ukraine? Because there's a knock-on consequence to what will we do going forward. So in terms of the backward look, we set up an organisation called Kindred, which works for Tony, that was empowered with a very substantial budget to provide capabilities to Ukraine at the pace they need to be provided. Instead of doing what we would traditionally have done in the UK, which is to go to quite a low-level team on each programme and ask them exactly what they wanted, we went to the top of the shop. We went to the Ukrainian Chief of Defence, and we've said, what is the most important thing for you right now? And the Kindred team have worked with the Ukrainian Chief of Defence staff to make available the thing that was most important. The UK worked with allies, over 40 different nations of allies, and the UK, because we are recognised as particularly efficient in terms of the way that our acquisition operates. I know that will be surprising to a number of you, but actually the UK is the preferred route for the difficult things to get, because we are the fastest and most efficient. So we've picked up a whole set of absolute priorities, whilst other nations have stepped into things like providing munitions where they could just turn up the volume of manufacture. So empowering and enabling the Kindred team, and then from my side, which was in Tony's team, and then from my side, making sure that we had a team that worked hand in glove with them which is my operations team, run by a two-star general, who was rapidly doing the sourcing with industry. Because we empowered and enabled the teams, because we made sure that the oversight was one checker, not 11 checkers, that's allowed them to operate really, really quickly, and get the things that the top of the shop in Ukraine thought was absolutely essential. The shift to working with industry, instead of around requirements, but around problem sets and budgets, I have this much to spend, this is the problem we're trying to solve, what can you do, has absolutely energised industry. And that's been really, really effective. To make sure we've marshalled all the resources of Europe in the most effective way, we have set up the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, originally led by the Americans, now led in cooperation between UK, Germany and Ukraine. We have a ministerial level version of that, and we have a National Armaments Director version of that, and that leads over 40 nations using their equivalents of me, driving acquisition through whichever supplier can be most efficient and effective at delivering that kind of capability. So we share the work, and we cooperate using capability collaborations. So the level of international collaboration around particular capability themes has been extraordinary. So that's the kind of backward look of to what we've done. What are the pitfalls? I won't call it a pitfall, I'll call it a reality. A reality is you'll sometimes make a mistake. So we have, in all good faith, bought things for Ukraine that they've said is an absolute priority. We've delivered it to Ukraine, and they thought it was going to work, and then a month later, the adversary has out-innovated it. And it's just, and as a consequence, that kit that we've bought is just thrown away and ignored because it's no longer relevant. That's the pitfall of operating at this pace of innovation. It is an arms race, and the speed with which you're operating is phenomenal. A simple example of that is when we started the war, at the front end of the war, it was perfectly possible for you to use radio frequency communications, radio links, to talk to your drones. Now, and except in some very special cases, talking to your drones in the electromagnetic warfare environment, i.e. the jamming level that we're seeing from the Russians, is almost impossible. And therefore, instead of a radio link, we now have very long spools of fibre that come out the back of the drones. A mode of operation that would not have been imagined 2.5 years ago, and yet has become absolutely necessary. And the Russians are doing the same. So the speed of this evolution is quite phenomenal. So that's the biggest pitfall, is the pace of change, and the fact you need to recognise that it is right and proper that you as a Public Accounts Committee are going to hear me going forward saying, yeah, I've stopped this programme, I've written that off, I've thrown that away, that's not relevant anymore. I bought that for the season, but I've thrown it away now. We've got to get really comfortable that that's the reality of operating in this new higher threat environment. And that's what good value is, doing that, because it's innovating to stay up with the market.
Can I just add a couple of other points? So, to me, David has overseen the £3 billion. Yeah, this year it will be 4.5 billion in a light touch way. When we talk about these teams, so that Kindred team is led by a one-star civil servant who is spending that money on behalf of all of us. So large sums of money, relatively junior level, with light touch oversight, but with empowered teams, and then hooked up to Andy's two-star general, who then actually enables it to get to contracts and to companies. The other pitfall is the imbalance of demand and supply. So when and that's a real issue. So you thought you had this amount of money to buy these number of shells, but actually the industry doesn't exist in terms of the supply, and therefore the cost of those shells goes up. And if you track the cost of a 155 shell over the course of the last 3 years, then that is a real problem. That's when you then need your investment of BAE and Rheinmetall. You then also link up internationally with your allies to try to get over those supply problems, and then you might be buying from other providers until that industrial supply comes on tap. And how do you manage that whilst retaining good value for money, but most importantly, keeping Ukraine in the fight?
Thank you. On that last point, Admiral, it'd be interesting to get a better understanding from you in terms of where we have taken this more innovative approach, how much of it has been done in lockstep with our allies, and how much of it does sort of sit solely within the UK. And also, have we found that because of that sort of level of cooperation, which maybe didn't exist in the recent past, we are able then to start applying that to our own domestic procurement processes, and we're able to sort of embed those innovations as a more permanent way of doing things when it comes to procuring military equipment?
Yes, so Andy might want to come in. So at the higher level, so the Ukraine Defence Contact Group frequently is over 50 nations. That, I mean, to be honest, the origin of it came under Ben Wallace when he was Secretary of State, and an initial group in Copenhagen. The US then took it on. And then it's now with the UK and German lead, and that's a collectivism that just in the last 2 meetings, so the last meeting a few weeks ago in Brussels, even though we're 3.5 years in, raised 21 billion euros of continued support for Ukraine. And that's on the back of the previous meeting, which was about 6 weeks earlier, that raised 10 billion euros. So you've got, if you like, you've got that sort of international crowdfunding and that level of collectivism. Then you've got the honesty of where is the money going and what does Ukraine want. So if you take the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, it always comes with a Western assessment of the battlefield and a Ukraine assessment and a list of priority capabilities that Ukraine needs in this supporting with. Rather than just updating it every 6 weeks, we've then also adopted a range of what we call capability coalitions. So the UK and Norway, for example, lead on maritime. There's a drone coalition. There's an artillery coalition. There's a cyber coalition, an IT, and so you've got about 12 different coalitions which are being led by different countries. That tries to thread through what does Ukraine need now in the fight tonight, but also what does Ukraine need in the future to be able to continue to defend itself and to deter future aggression, because it's going to need to build up capabilities as well as the fight tonight, and you're doing that through leadership by different countries and by transparency and by linking back to Ukraine what armed forces do they think they require in the future, what level of budget will they be putting to this in the future, how can we support in the here and now. So that's going on. Then if you keep coming down to a lower level, the short answer to your question is it's very mixed in terms of what is UK centric, and then what is best utilised by the UK saying we can provide this, but making it open to other nations who might say, actually, I might have a better missile that I can get there more quickly. I'm also adapting this drone technology, and I think I've reached a certain level of maturity. And instead of having a competition where you're trying to suffocate your competitor, you're actually in a competition where you're trying to do the best for Ukraine, and you're trying to drag your competitor forward because you've got that clarity, because they're in the fight tonight. And that's what's going on the whole time across a whole range of capabilities.
And then just, if I may, to just go back to one of my earlier points, how is this going to impact the sort of longer term way that we procure military equipment in this country? This is probably, this is a once in a generation episode, I suppose, in the way that we've had to very quickly and innovatively acquire certain equipment. How will that, over the longer term, change the way we do things in the UK?
So I think at the higher level, it's the fact that we're all spending more on defence.
Yeah.
It's also the way that we're cooperating with other nations. So when Andy talks about national armament directors and their meetings, so how can you collaborate in a much more successful way? And where does the UK specialise in its capabilities? Where do you defer to others? And how do you manage that? So I think that's much more at the strategic level. I'm wary that there are things about this which are fundamental and will shift certain areas of capability. There are other things where it won't change the way that we operate, but it can look to trigger, right? Can you have clearer accountability? Can you have a much more simple system? Can you have less duplication? Can you have less process? And then you get back to some of the earlier conversation. If in the past we thought it was somehow tolerable to have 6 years to get something on contract, no, it's going to be 2 years. Now you're going to have to change the way you operate and your whole system. Industry is going to have to respond to that, and then that gets you to a different way of going about our business. And I think it's almost a challenge on us and something for the committee to then see, right, if we've got this clarity about how some things can be better, how do we mainstream as much of that as possible, and where is it appropriate, and where can you take a bit more financial risk, where can you take a bit more operational risk, where actually do your current systems are entirely appropriate and you don't want to change them, and how do we gauge that, and where do we bring it in, and then what does it look like?
And I think for me in that space, building on comments from both CDS and Mr. Stark, it's in particular getting that innovation loop into our core, both requirement setting and then subsequent procurement, which is partly about making sure that we're joining up, the warfighter with our own sort of, scientists and engineers with industry in a kind of whole of enterprise way. Definitely a role for the National Armaments Director. But also then it's the mindset of when we buy our next set of drones, these are not something that are going to be kind of on the shelf or in the warehouse or in the hangar for 10 years. We are going to have to keep iterating the capability that they bring over time, training with the latest technology, but accepting that there is a spiral development or a growth path, and the shelf life of some of these capabilities is necessarily shorter than instinctively and traditionally defence procurement tends to view these things.
Nestle Canaskin, please.
Thank you very much. And can I just take the opportunity through you, Chair, just to thank panel members. I'm a member of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly as part of the UK delegation, actually led by Mr. Twigg. And just to echo the comments you made earlier around Ukraine's ability to be able to defend their country, it's very clear from meeting parliamentarians from Ukraine at our meetings that they absolutely recognise that, and they see the UK's contribution through military terms a key to them being able to exist now and in the future too. My question was going to be about acquisition programmes in general, just building on what Lloyd has asked. The Defence Command Paper from 2023 sets out a maximum of 5 years, from my understanding, a 5-year commitment for acquisition programmes. But the National Audit Office report from the same year highlights that the MOD's plans are to replace the UK stocks over a 9-year period. I wondered if you might be able to comment on that and how you align a 5-year commitment versus a 9-year time period as outlined by the National Audit Office report. And is the 5-year commitment for acquisition going to be maintained by the MOD? And if so, has that been made, will that be made in a timely manner, I guess is what my question is. And to what extent is that linked to the Strategic Defence Review?
Let him answer those questions, otherwise.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get finished by 6. If I could please ask for short questions and short answers.
Okay, well, there's an incentive. I think there are 2 separate questions there. So let me unpack them and then we can address them very quickly. Firstly, there's the question of the time frame over which we are replenishing equipment and stocks and other consumables that we have donated to Ukraine. And that's partly driven by investment in building up industrial capacity where sometimes production lines had closed. It's also thinking about, in some cases, it makes more sense for us to invest in the next generation of capability rather than simply replacing the equipment that we have donated. So the 9 years is driven, I mean, in part by a view of financial profile, but mainly about the capacity to deliver. But Mr. Stark may want to expand on that. And then the more general point about the timeliness with which we are undertaking procurement plays back to the comments we've made about acquisition reform, about the reform programme, about that segmentation into large platforms and sort of nuclear submarines are definitely at one end of the spectrum, necessarily take a long time to build, but the capability that those platforms offer through their mission systems, their weapon systems, their sensors is something that we want to spiral and bring through more quickly. But I think those are sort of the 2 halves of the question. I think you've answered the first part. On the second part, just to add a little bit of colour, when we did the integrated procurement model, we absolutely recognised we needed to get faster, and therefore setting a 5-year target was designed to stop military end users over-specifying. So it was designed to constrain that dynamic. We always knew that there would be certain platforms that would take longer than 5 years. A nuclear submarine is always going to take more than 5 years. But on average, we were trying to get it down. What we've done, and we are doing in the development of the new model, is to kind of go to the next stage, which is firstly to segment the market, to recognise that the big strategic platforms are always going to take a bit longer, and really push the time down on the other programmes, where the vast majority of things are. Secondly, to then give time to contract, which is the biggest problem we have to solve at the moment, is that it takes us too long to get on contract. So we're laser focusing on that, and we will be asking the NAO to help report on that, so that you get a regular feed on that piece of information, as well as the time to then deliver. The goal should be to continue to deliver the aspiration of the integrated procurement model, which is to then make sure that total programme length remains under the 5 years in the vast majority of cases. But again, we'll start to report on that date, on the times from contract to delivery, which will give you another data point about how we're improving.
So it may be 9 years overall, but that's because some of the programme's procurement start may be later. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Nezel. Quick question on single source procurement, please, if I may. Paragraph 2.21 on page 31 makes it clear we've procured 1.27 billion through this route. I'm always slightly worried about single procurement and that we're getting a competitive deal. When this committee went to the Pentagon last year, we did hear, I think in detail, how the Americans are very strict with the information they get from their suppliers. I just wonder whether we are as strict with that information and as we bear down on our suppliers as well as we could in these single source procurements. Mr. Stark, please.
Single source is often a tool that we need to use. That is true when we have unique capabilities in the UK, particularly in nuclear, and Chief of Defence Nuclear might want to expand on what she's been doing to drive performance in that space, because she's really been driving the envelope on single source in the nuclear space. So sometimes it's absolutely necessary because there is only one supplier, and sometimes it's necessary because you're extending on from a programme that you had, and therefore it would be a waste of money to go for a complete start again. You wouldn't get competitive value. So we make that assessment each time that we go through it. The single source regulator actually has a wealth of useful data in terms of the programme performance, and are actually very good at helping us hold the companies to account. The companies don't like it, so some of my most difficult conversations are with companies where we're using the single source data to really hold them to account. Yeah, I'll stop there. I think there is opportunity for single source regulation development, and we're having those conversations now. But in general, it's a necessary tool to deliver value for money, particularly if you have vital national capabilities that you want to sustain.
Madam McDermott, you've been very patient. You spend a lot of money with very few big suppliers, much of which is single source. Do you have anything to add to Mr. Start's answer?
Yeah, so I think the single source regulations are part of the equation. Since I've been enrolled, as we've had the opportunity to recontract in new opportunities, as you know, we move to the next stage of contracts, we are being a lot more thoughtful about how we get the incentivisation right in those contracts. So I touched on it a little bit earlier. This drive to really get the objectives clear, and I think this is also one of the lessons that comes across in the Ukraine piece. Obviously, in nuclear, we haven't had quite the immediacy of that imperative of supply into a war, but trying to get people to understand we do have that immediacy of needing to ensure that we are delivering nuclear super effectively because it is underpinning everything that everybody else is currently doing is really critical. So I think there are a whole range of levers that we've been trying to use in defence nuclear, contracting better. You know, there are still things that you can do within the single source regulations that you're not just simply saying, well, it's just cost plus. So trying to incentivise delivery against what we really want, which is schedule. And delivering to schedule, as I said earlier, should have a good correlation with cost control, because it's those, you know, schedule overruns that then drive a lot of cost into the programmes because, you know, so much is workforce costs, etc. So I think, you know, single source can be a little bit blunt, but I think if you are looking at it as a tool and thinking about what else you can use, making sure that you've got, you know, to your point, Chair, are we getting the right information so that we can understand, you know, how the money, you know, we're spending is being effective? We've been working much more closely with industry, again driving this idea of national endeavour because it is really critical that we drive these programmes, but trying to really underpin this idea of transparency and what can we do together to speed up programmes to be more efficient. So it's working with industry in a different way. It is trying to contract in a way that incentivises the outcomes that we actually want to deliver. You know, there may be more that could be done around single source, but I'm sort of focused on how we find that flexibility to really drive a win-win through these contracts for us and for industry.
Thank you very much. Before we move off Ukraine, we're very often criticising in this committee, but I think where things go well, we should acknowledge that. I think it's been a great credit to all of you sitting around this table that we've delivered £7.8 billion worth of aid and equipment, military equipment to Ukraine, and above all, trained 41,000 people. I think that has been a great credit, so well done, all of you. Right, we're now moving on to Derek Twigg, please.
Can we just go on to the Infrastructure and Procurement Authority's report? And within that, if you look at the projects there for defence, 8 were in the latest report, 22, 23, 24, 8 were red and 36 were amber. That's also about 90% of the projects. How do you categorise that performance, Mr. Williams?
So, look, firstly, this covers, around 50 of our most complex programmes. So, I don't think it should surprise the committee that these are the ones that bring with them intrinsically most difficulty in delivery. In a number of cases, there are programmes with sort of sub-projects, and we've made good progress on some of those sub-projects. Some are already in service for programmes that are nevertheless still rated red, because not all of the components are making the progress that we wanted to see or that the SRO has wanted to see. They are a sort of snapshot in time based on a combination of either the senior responsible officer's judgment of risk and progress, backed up by periodic review by the Infrastructure Projects Authority, now sort of merged into the new NISTA organisation. I mean, set against the portfolio of major projects overall, we are sort of in the same sort of zone. It's important that we're not feeling and we're not complacent about the challenges in successful delivery of those 50 or so programmes. The red ones get a lot of attention. The amber ones get quite a lot of attention. And actually to get to green requires quite sustained engagement as well.
Well, there was only 2 of those at the last report, wasn't there?
There were only 2 of those. So the last data shows a sort of modest worsening of the position, and I think we may see that trend continue in the next set of data, which I expect to be published in the summer. But for me, it is really about the complexity of delivery. I don't know, Mr. Stark, you might just want to give some colour to that.
I think the one to focus on. Well, firstly, it's important to see these as.
Sorry, just interrupt. There's some very big and important projects here. They're all important, but some very big projects here.
These are our biggest, often collaborative international projects that are fundamental to defence. So they're really important, and we wouldn't wish to demean them. But we do think it's helpful to see it in the context of just the scale of everything else we deliver. In terms of colour coding, you would expect most programmes to be amber. The reason you'd expect most programmes to be amber is the way that amber is defined is that the programme SRO believes the programme will deliver to the expectations upon it, but there are some risks and challenges to overcome. If they weren't amber, if we were not challenging our programmes to deliver to reasonably aggressive timelines or to reasonably aggressive cost, this committee would be giving us a very hard time for the fact that we were padding out the timescales and padding out the costs of our major programmes. So we judge the programmes to be realistic but challenging, and therefore realistic but challenging equals amber. So the vast majority will be amber. I'm not happy about the reds, and when programmes go into red...
Well, how would you characterise the red projects then in terms of eight? So in terms of...
So red programmes are where the SRO is concerned that they either will not deliver them to cost or to time, or won't deliver the military outcome that was originally expected of this. The data shows historically that the vast majority of programmes, even the red ones, deliver the military capability, but they're too often late. So we normally get there on cost, there or thereabouts, not always, but normally. So they're often late, and the red signalling is an indicator that the SRO doesn't believe they themselves can recover the programme without help. So it is a warning bell that comes up to us as senior management to help lean in and support those programmes.
How many of those are at risk of failing completely at the moment?
So if I take the ones that we've got in front of us, I do not expect any of the programmes that are in front of us to fail to deliver the military capability.
So none of the 8 that are currently red?
So none of the 8 I expect to fail to deliver, but I do expect, I know that some of them will be late. So let me give you an example. The E7 capability, which is a vital early warning capability, is late, and they've had real technical and delivery issues within Boeing delivering that aircraft. That's the bad news. The good news is it's had a huge amount of attention from me and others to get it back on track. It will deliver later than I'd hoped, but I am pleased that the first aircraft is now flying. It's in RAF colours.
So what's the delivery date for it? It's Wedgetail we're talking about.
So Wedgetail. So we should have the first of the Wedgetails with us by the end of the year and in operational capability next year. So I just use that as a single example.
And that is going to be absolutely critical in our coalition of the willing and protecting aircraft over Ukraine. So the delivery of that is absolutely critical, isn't it?
So, not for that. Go on, you can speak to the Ukraine piece, but E7 is a critical national capability, and it's really important we deliver it.
But it's not critical for the coalition of the willing and what we envisage with that. There are other capabilities, there are other countries that can satisfy what will be the operational requirement for what we anticipate with the coalition of the willing. Just to separate that's all.
Okay. What I don't want to do is to underplay the importance with which we focus on getting RED programmes back to where they need to be. Okay. And our track record of making sure they deliver the capability is extremely good. Our track record of delivering them as fast as I would like is not as good as I'd like it to be.
And also not at cost neither.
It depends on the programme. Quite a lot of them actually. So if you take the example of something like Ajax.
What's Wedgetail costing additionally?
Wedgetail's actually going to cost less than the original programme expectation. It's a fixed price programme, and therefore we were originally buying 5, reduced it to 3 in an earlier SDR round, and because it's a fixed price programme, the expectation is that Boeing will still deliver to the price. So it's not a price issue on Wedgetail, it is a timescale issue. And I do have to say, although I've been critical here of Boeing, they have lent in with serious amounts of resource and stuck with that programme to make sure they deliver.
Okay, one final thing to Mr Williams, just before I finish. Both the Defence Committee and this committee obviously is concerned about the fact that it's approximately £300 billion budget for equipment over 10 years, based on figures 2 years ago. How do we scrutinise that?
So, as I sort of indicated earlier, it's the government's intention to get back into a routine of sharing information on our forward plans once we're through the cycle of the SDR and the spending review, and for that data to be available to colleagues in the NAO to analyse and provide insight to the committee as well. In advance of that, I think there are opportunities for specific briefings, either supported by NAO reports on particular capabilities. So we are just finalising, I think, a report on F-35, which would lend itself to a committee session. Where material is necessarily confidential, either on capability grounds or commercially sensitive, ministers have been open to the idea, supportive of the idea of private briefings. And then, of course, there is the range of normal parliamentary scrutiny as well. I am clear the department works better with the scrutiny that we get both from this committee and from the Defence Select Committee. And ministers are clear that they want the department to be more transparent than we have been. Once we get through the cycle of the Defence Review, then I think it's, for me, not so much a return to normal business, but actually an expectation, an ambition that we might be able to share the decisions that have been made, what that means for the forward programme, in a way that actually enhances the scrutiny that this committee is able to give to us.
Right. Sarah Hall, you should like to follow that, and let's see where you get to.
I would like to follow that, thank you, Chair. Going back to the scrutiny and parliamentary accountability to Parliament, obviously it's absolutely essential given the scale of the money that we're talking about here. So exactly how we report back, when will the next report back be, timescale wise, And then in terms of the frequency, how often that will be happening, can you give us some idea of that as well, please?
So these are all questions that we are currently considering, and I set some of those out in my letter to the Chair last month. I think, look, one of the criticisms that the committee sort of rightly had in previous versions of the report was that by the time we finish the planning round, provide data to the NAO produces their report, and then we schedule a hearing. Normally it's about 12 months after the cut-off date for the decisions that we are presenting. So we're looking at how we might be able to do this in a more timely fashion. I think there's something against a government commitment of a spending review every other year about a publication of our plans in the year of a spending review will necessarily look a bit different to one in the off year, if I might put it like that. And we're also working through how the new defence reform construct, both in terms of the responsibilities of the four of us here on the panel and the way in which we are looking at restructuring our budgets with less focus on equipment or infrastructure or R&D innovation, but thinking about those in the round, is whether there is a better way of presenting information that the committee, that the Defence Select Committee, that Parliament more generally would find helpful. So I would expect ministers to want to set out where they get to on that process shortly, but we remain absolutely keen to hear from the committee on aspects that they have previously found helpful, or indeed examples of good practice from other departments.
Sarah Hall?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit vague still, though, isn't it? I mean, the Secretary of State said last year, back end of last year, I think it was, that he was absolutely committed to transparency and being an increase in transparency, and yet we're still here 2 years on from the information that we're seeking to have. So I'm going to press again in terms of coming back with that information, given the urgency of it, and given the need, given the amount of money that we're talking about, given that the accountability and getting value for taxpayers' money, getting value for that, best value for money, it's absolutely essential to have that information as soon as possible. It's essential for the NAO to have access to that information as well. So in terms of that coming forwards, can we get a date?
So I can't give you a specific date. I mean, the process needs to follow.
Can we get a ballpark date?
Finalising. We need to finalise the Strategic Defence Review and get that published, and there is a government intention to do that. I think before the summer break. That we need to work through some of the more detailed capability choices through an internal balance of investment process. And then set out the results of that, both for parliamentary scrutiny and to share the underpinning data with the National Audit Office. Now, that would suggest to me that we're talking about a time frame of later this calendar year into the autumn. But these are decisions that ministers are considering, and I think it's only right that ministers should set out how they intend the department will fulfil their ambition for our transparency to you.
So, Permanent Secretary, I thank you for your offer of private briefings. We may well want to take that up, whether it's on F-35s or something else or a mixture of things. We don't know yet, but we will need to consider that. That is helpful. But I think your answers to Miss Sarah Hall were not really very satisfactory. I mean, I'm hopeful we're not going to get a defence review every year. So we have to, and we must do this on an annual basis. It's very important, and we need to be able to do it with a baseline so we can measure 1 year against another. And in a fast-flowing world and a dangerous world, it is even more important that we get these reviews right so that this committee can scrutinise, as Sarah has said, this huge amount of money and find out whether it is suitable to meet the threats of that changing world. So I think there is some thinking to be done here. Can I ask you to take it away and really write to this committee with your ideas how this can be done on a satisfactory and thorough way at least once a year?
I'm happy to do that. There's no disagreement about the ambition.
Well, it's the methodology that I'm after, not the ambition. It's the precise methodology that I would like to see, please, Permanent Secretary.
I will take that away. Chair.
That's very good of you. Thank you very much. Anybody, any other questions? Can I thank our witnesses very much? You're a very senior team of witnesses. You're all very busy people. We do thank you very much. It's been a very interesting session, I think. So an uncorrected transcript of this hearing will be published on the committee's website in the coming days. Of course, the committee will produce a report, probably with recommendations. Thank you again for coming before us. Order.